perhaps the three of us now would just take a moment to kind of wrap up some final thoughts as a little mini panel, and then perhaps take some questions from you guys if you have any that you'd like to put. I'm especially thinking about your statement about what you would like to input to researchers and what we might then do on the academic side, based upon the kind of research knowledge that you've built and shared with us, and what you'd like to see, or where you think we should be kind of thinking in terms of pitching this into the kind of international understanding of what's happening. Okay, so I think I've kind of used my bit maybe, so can I ask Allison perhaps to speak next?
Hi, thank you all for bearing with us through this all. It's been fantastic and great. And I think, like Adrian has said, it's been really, really invigorating to bring different people from different sectors of life together, both people working in civil society, but also private in startup fintech companies themselves who are dealing with some of these questions and trying to craft resolutions in the moment on the ground. And then the work today from bringing really great empirical research. I think, as Adrian said, some of us in Australia who not being able to leave the country and things, the idea of really grounded empirical research, it's been something we've been waiting to do for over a year now. And it's really great to see really well thought out, grounded, developed empirical research and really strong historical research, like what Srikar and Anubhuti brought to the table today, and Siddharth's really deeply historically grounded discussion of regulation and moving that forward over different media formats. It's just been a really exciting conversation, as well as Usha's own empirical research on misinformation and content moderation. And so I think it's just been really nice to be able to sit and take the time over the last 8 hours and discuss those. And as Adrian said, when you think about it, it's a really rapidly changing space, or at least the potential is rapidly changing, but how it's hitting the ground. And I think that's one of the things that the last presentation really brought home to me is, and Pradip's comment on the question of, well, is the technology providing fundamental change, or is Indian society domesticating the technology in different ways? And I think that's what really intersects with that last presentation, gives me a really strong feeling of, that socio-technical interface, and really what is possible, what kind of imagination are we putting on things, and what's actually practical, and what are the constraints within which everyday people on the ground are operating. Because I think that's what's really important there, is how everyday people on the ground are operating and receiving, and their own imaginations around these. What are the risks? What are the benefits? What is the larger life that they have to deal with, and that these are fitting into? And similarly, that's very much what I saw in Franz and Kate's discussion as well. And like thinking about, how is this large, massive technological overlay going to be received in a public health systems that has and by public health practitioners that have so many other concerns, so many other demands on their times? Is this potentially the solution, or how would it be best to invest resources within that, given these constraints? And so I think there's a lot of really unexpected overlaps and intersections between the papers. And so it's just really been a fun time for me. That being said, maybe I'll hand it over to Pradip before opening up.
This has been a fabulous conversation over the last 2 days. I've enjoyed, each one of the presentations and the sessions. I was telling Srikara that he shouldn't apologize for the noise of the trains, because I missed that. We've not been able to go to India and hear all those noises, and I really do miss that. So it's good to hear all that. But apart from that, I think, the presentations today and yesterday, I think, we had a range of presentations. We dealt with various aspects of platforms, from fintech to platform regulation to issues around social media to, and also today, issues around health platforms and IP platforms and you name it, right? It's been it's been a terrific journey over the last 2 days. But also I think the last presentation was on understanding how people are accessing and using, especially women, how they're accessing and using this media, using mobile phones and stuff. So I think there's been rich learnings, and on the one hand, I think we do need to deal with issues on regulation and policy and the understanding of the Indian stack and all the rest of it. That's brilliant. But at the same time, I think we need to have more research on the kind of coreface interfaces when ordinary people meet intermediaries, when ordinary people interact with platforms, what's happening, right? And that's such an important aspect of this whole story, right, of the narrative. And I think we need much more of those kinds of stories as well, because I think we've got at the moment, I think it's pretty lopsided, because we have stories about narratives about infrastructures and platforms and all the rest of it, but very little in terms of that core face, right? When ordinary people interact with these platforms, make sense of them. In some cases, it might benefit them. In most cases, it doesn't. All those kinds of stories, right? That we need actually to get that big picture, right? So for me, it's been definitely a learning experience. Fintech is not something that I know much about, and I think that fintech, presentations yesterday were very enlightening for me. Although I still think that we are caught up in this kind of information technology, as the solution kind of understandings. That's very dominant in some of these in some of these presentations, right? On the other hand, I think there's I also understand that the state in India is a dominant player. It has to be involved in these kinds of issues. It has to take the country forward technologically, right? And so that's how it is, right? But I think the need for that kind of holistic understanding of the state, technology, private players, ordinary people accessing technologies, all these is part of that story. And so I think in these last 2 days, we've had some glimpses of that story, right? And it's great that we were able to kind of get those narratives and stories over the last 2 days. So thank you all for wonderful presentations. Thank you.
See, I still have one question. I was wondering how easy it was to talk to people about these things. I think one of the interesting things I thought about in this presentation and yesterday when we began is that, when you have people who are developing business in India or doing business in India and trying to kind of attach a developmental mode as well to the business model, they will come out and tell you what they're doing and why and how they're doing it. Most of their US counterparts, would not come to an academic conference, and you would never get closer than their 15th lawyer to what they actually think about what they're doing. But at the same time, when it comes to going into households and talking to people about the whole day-to-day business of money, that's again, when we talk about privacy, how easy is it to kind of engage people in conversation and get those kind of stories? So I think it's interesting in a way how the novelty of these things brings to light things that perhaps weren't discussed much previously. So it's really critical kind of work. In any case, before I ask you another question, which I just did under a code, I'll ask if anybody has any questions to put to the panel for the last 10 minutes while we're here.
I actually have a very technical question. Would there be any proceedings or notes coming out of this that we can share with or recording?
Well, as we said at the beginning of the session, so we're recording the sessions through Zoom. So we're hoping that we'll be able to kind of edit those, cut those up into pieces and give everybody a copy of the presentations, their own and everybody else's. So you'll be able to access those. And I think we'd like to do some transcripts if we can. I think in terms of what we might often at this moment at a conference is when we start talking about publication and those kinds of things. He says, thinking of a long collection of edited books. But I think that there are discussions that could be had about Well, first, one thing. One, we're going to have a kind of more Pan-Asian version of this event in Singapore in November, which I think, will be worth keeping an eye on it, because I think they're also having these conversations across other countries in the region. You might find some interesting kind of comparative information coming there, thinking about where you began with that global literature, because I know there's work going on in Indonesia and the Philippines and other places that might be interesting as a point of comparison to the work that you're doing in India. So I don't think this will be the last conversation that we'll have. We're hoping to do a follow-up workshop. We have, funding to come and do a workshop in India as soon as the barriers lift, so that we can gather a bigger audience and some of us and some other people. And likely we'll also try and do a version of this later. But I think where there's a kind of interest in putting together this discussion, if people would like to think about how we might collectively develop a think piece or a collection of things, or even excerpts from what we've done, then I'm certainly happy to facilitate that discussion. Does anybody have any other questions? I can see, hello Shishir, I can see Shishir's there.
Oh, it's Shishir here.
Yeah. It's my good friend from
Hi Adrian, sorry.
Hi Shishir, how are you?
I'm okay, just I would say surviving onslaught of everything. New online semester beginning Monday, so everything is just but I'm sorry I missed yesterday. I was just back from home. I needed a break. But so I've not really heard the conversation. I just wanted to make sure I connected on one panel. So yeah, hi Pradip.
Hi, Shishir.
You should be able to share the thing larger with you, and I'm sure Shishir will be with us the next time, because I know Shishir also has quite a keen interest in the unfolding of these kinds of stories. So I think it's an ongoing conversation. I think the stuff around platforms and regulation, the kind of fintech segment, but it's also interesting the convergence of these things and the way platforms are designed to produce a kind of transactional infrastructure. They support that, and there will be many gains from that, even there are challenges in implementing it. But there's also those kind of questions around data and how data translates to money, and how that kind of works in the power dynamics. I mean, I'm still shocked by Usha's revelation. The 42% of this traffic is driven by bots. It's as much as that you have such large-scale strategic manipulation of the public sphere. I mean, that's just, I mean, I knew it was bad, but that really was quite shocking. So I think when you start adding the numbers, as a qualitative researcher largely, but when you start adding the numbers to what we're discussing, it really does hit home. I think that was the great thing about both of those presentations. And I suppose maybe one thing I'll say at the end is that I think this idea of transactions, which is really useful because it makes me think of exchanges between people and relationships between people that are mediated by technology. It makes me think about the reciprocities between citizens and states. And so it kind of takes us a little bit beyond thinking about platform, simply as a firm or an app. Yeah? But actually what is being mediated, what's actually happening, and between who, So as Allison was saying, it takes us to that kind of socio-technical interface, and we then think about transactions as being kind of fundamentally social exchanges, and therefore the challenge of understanding the scope of social exchanges in India, perhaps beyond even the best of us, I think, and probably always will be. But it does kind of humanize in important ways. And I think all the presentations have really made that effort to kind of humanize the technology here, and the importance of humanizing the technology if we're going to see a kind of a humane architecture, which I think is what everyone in India needs and wants and deserves. So going back to that kind of sort of constitutionality of India. So I think that's been a really important contribution, and a really kind of key shared thread that is kind of heartwarming and kind of encouraging, especially under the current kind of conditions where there's really so much challenging circumstances to face, and some of the things that we could assume to keep coasting a couple of years ago, or trends that we thought were very clear, seem to have been disrupted, and lots of people of course, in India have lost relatives. Lots of people have. Lots of those small businesses have been wiped out by lockdowns, and it's going to take them a long time to build back. So this kind of constant determination and courage to move forward, despite these knockdowns of these kind of really serious disruptions, some of which just couldn't be seen, is inspiring and should be inspiring to everyone. And so it really is a privilege to be able to use forums like this to share some of that knowledge and some of those stories with the rest of the world. So we're all very grateful here on the Australian side, and not just me, but Usha and Allison, Pradip, and others. And we hope we can bring these two sides again together soon. But you have our contact details. Please don't feel shy about getting in touch about anything where you think we might be interested, or something you might be interested, or things we might be able to help with, or conversations you want to continue.
I just wanted to ask participants from India, how are they doing with all this COVID thing? How has it been for you guys? Anyone, whoever is based in India.
I'm happy to kind of comment on it. I think it's been definitely like a roller coaster, especially starting 2021, where we were hit by the second wave. And I think I'm probably not doing a very good job of articulating this, because for a lot of us, it's been very personal, or at least second-handedly personal. But we've had kind of like a government who's kind of not been at its best. And we've kind of had to rely on our social circles and social groups to kind of get the help that we otherwise thought would come from different channels. So I think on that front, it's been very kind of emotionally taxing. Some of us have chosen to kind of shut down, whereas some of us have just kind of become all the more active in disseminating services. Things do appear kind of calmed down now, but we are kind of looking at a looming third wave. We've also had some kind of our government reporting that there were no deaths from lack of oxygen tanks. So that was an interesting one. But I think, like in our social circle, we're all okay, but there are definitely groups of people who've had it really, really bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, the oxygen thing was really interesting. So there was just a small article in the Indian Express yesterday, and so the two parts to it. The government was saying that where we've asked the states to give detailed information, and yet in the detailed information there is no place where you necessarily indicate that patients can die because of oxygen, lack of oxygen, right? So if that is something not to be reported, obviously nobody reports, right? And on the other hand, on the hospital side, what is fascinating is that hospitals would not want to concede that there was lack of oxygen supply, because then they are subject to other kinds of, court cases, etc. So here you have an interesting policy, episode where on both sides, government side and the hospital side, the protocols kind of encourage you to actually hide data, right? So for me, as a interest in policy, this is really fascinating, and it's not exceptional. It happens quite often, but it's staggering the way it is stated, right, in Parliament, that there was no death from oxygen. So that very fascinating. But yes, broadly, I think North India was really devastated in many parts with the second wave. The southern part, so I'm in Mumbai right now, although there's, Bombay and Maharashtra has been in the throes of considerable impact, but it was, the beds, etc., were maintained better in Maharashtra, not everywhere, but northern parts were really more badly affected, right? From Delhi, UP, and Bihar. So yes, we are all waiting
Just
magical date, and 31st December 2021. You know, it will vanish.
And I think it has been striking everywhere, particularly in our profession, just how important communication has been to this, and just how many missteps by politicians, mixed messaging in the health communication worldwide really has been a complete disaster. Not just because of fake news, but because of people hedging bets. It's been politicized. It's got just and we've kind of hampered ourselves in so many ways. And of course, in Australia, we also have a federal system, and so we have that confusion between state and central government. Our only saving grace, of course, has been geography, and it's at the expense of isolation. Of course, we're seeing now that perhaps even geography won't be enough, and I think it'll probably again be some time before we see how or we ever really know the full picture in India. And perhaps some of these things that we've been talking about had they been in place in the way they've been envisioned, would have made a difference. And perhaps not, because viruses don't carry phones. So Pradip, one thing.
Just to add to what Shishir said, I was reading in the Hindu, I think it was yesterday or today or something. And now the reason, and Siddharth might be able to clarify this, but one of the reasons why states have said that there were no oxygen-related deaths, lack of oxygen-related deaths, that by law, I hear that, you can only die with a lack of oxygen either through choking or through drowning. Right? These are the only two kinds of, two ways in which you can die because of a lack of oxygen legally, right? So that's the reason why states have said, or even Tamil Nadu and all these other states that are to some extent progressive, they've got a new government or the rest of it. Even they have said that there's not been any oxygen-related, deaths in that state. But anyway, Siddharth might know better about this, but this is what I read in the Hindu.
So I actually I don't have a clue, Pradip. No idea. I didn't know. This is news to me. What you're telling me. But I've been following this, the IT raids, income tax raids on the Dainik Bhaskar and other papers who reported about the COVID coverage and the kind of backlash they're getting from the government, which is like pretty disturbing.
In fact, there was an interesting tweet that came through one of those Hindi newspapers asking people to vote to say that whether they supported their courageous reporting. And the answer is like yes or no. And whatever the result I saw, it was about 80% people saying yes and 20% saying no. So this is like a tweet thing. But I just wanted to thank Anupati, Shishir, and Sharikara to talking about this issue. I know it is, sometimes it can be quite sensitive, and also there's a lot behind it, because I think all of us have been through quite a bit of different level of trauma in this time, but people who have been in India, they've been, I think, a lot more than we here in Australia. If our issues were being isolated and some of the businesses being decimated because of the lockdown, continuous lockdown and other issues, but in India it was like really, life and death kind of situation for many. And watching that and observing the government and the machinery really not meeting the needs can be quite traumatic. And in that, to continue to work or not work or whatever it is, however each one of us cope with it. I think to some extent what we've been talking about sometimes might seem like, oh, what are we talking about, this all high level digital stuff? But I think there is a connection there, which is when you have these kind of crises and all that, can we all learn from that and then use the technology to then, see if it can be somehow improved? So hopefully, I mean, I'm trying to be hopeful here.
I mean, I think around the world, I think this has been in many ways a stress test for the kind of vision of a digital society. And governance through apps, and apps have often failed to help us in this context, but lessons will be learned out of this, and so much data will be generated that therefore you'd think there may be kind of the basis for kind of laying down actually some of this kind of effort that's gone into digital architecture towards precisely this sort of thing, towards public health and the public good. Again, thinking about some of the presentations we had earlier, so that doesn't go to waste, or that will take some kind of time. So it gives us a kind of pause to think that maybe, the generation of competitive AI is not really the end goal of the systems we're talking about, but the way in which they can kind of help us to move forward and prosper and survive in daily life is actually what it's really all about.
Yeah.
So finally, just to wrap up then, thank you everyone for joining us. Everybody who's here now, everybody who was here yesterday. It's great to meet you all. I hope you're able to make some connections and stay in touch. We'd love to hear from you again. And I'm sure, notwithstanding what we're just talking about, that we will, be drinking chai before too long, or perhaps, have you here to introduce you to the foibles of our own particular federal setup. So on that note, I wish you all well and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian, for organizing, and others. Yeah, Allison.
Thank you, everyone. This was amazing. Have a lovely day.
Everyone.
Yeah, thank you.